which will feature an interview with the late Dr. Betty Shabazz just after her husband Malcolm X had been assassinated in 1965. She was interviewed by the late Mal Good of ABC News. That compelling interview and more coming up after this. History has duly noted the basic facts of the assassination of one of the most important figures of his time, Malcolm X. The date, February 21st, 1965. The time, midday. Location, Upper Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom, in front of a large audience. A police official issued this information to reporters shortly after the assassination.
Apparently, there were at least 8 or 10 shots fired, 7 of which hit Malcolm. He sustained 1 shot in the lower right chin, and the other 6 hit him in the chest and body.
Was he dead immediately?
No, he wasn't dead immediately, but expired very shortly thereafter.
But actually, only one fully accredited reporter was in the audience when Malcolm was struck down. Gene Simpson.
I would say I heard at least 8 shots fired. First, about 3 rapidly, and that's clear because Malcolm, I understand, was hit about 3 times. And then afterwards, when they were trying to get out, I imagine they were trying to scare everybody out of their way. There were many gunshots fired. I'm with WMCA Radio, and I didn't go as a reporter. I went, since I'm interested in current events, on my day off. Everybody knew what had happened, and there was screaming and pandemonium. I hit the floor and started doing kind of dog crawl towards a rampart, because at all this time, the gunfire was still going on, you see. And I was in what would have been the range of the gunfire. And just like everybody else, the first impression was to hit the floor. So I did that and got behind the rampart, and as fast as I could, got to a phone and filed my story.
How many shots were fired, would you say offhand? Dozens or?
I wouldn't say dozens. I would say I can accurately say at least 5 to 8.
How many people would you estimate were in the auditorium at the time?
I would estimate about 2,000.
And Malcolm had no opportunity to say anything to address the crowd other than the
The only
Muslim
words
meeting?
that he said were "Shalom Aleichem" and "Stay calm, stay cool." Those were his last words.
Malcolm had known his days were numbered. Some in the organization that had ousted him, the Nation of Islam, also known as the Black Muslims, felt that Malcolm was a traitor because he spoke out about the moral decay he said he saw in the organization.
The byline of Aubrey Barnett in the current issue of a national magazine says that the Black Muslims are a fraud. What is your comment on this?
Well, Aubrey Barnett is a very intelligent person, and he has a fine academic background, and I think that the story in itself was very analytical, and it was objective, and it was true.
He also says that the Black Muslim movement is just another little money-grabbing scheme feeding on Negro frustrations. Do you agree with this, too?
Well, if it is, and it is, and that's what it has deteriorated to, you still can't blame the Negro, and you can't blame the movement. You have to blame the society that let such frustrations develop until this is the result of it. I don't think any organization in itself can be condemned. The society and its shortcoming is what has produced an atmosphere that brings these organizations into existence.
He says there are probably less than 7,000 members now in the Muslims.
Well, it has fallen apart. No, thank you. It has fallen apart. And but what it has done in falling apart, many of those extremely militant and dissatisfied Black Americans are now free to participate into the full swing of the struggle that's going on in this country, and I think it will be inclined to step up the tempo.
U.S. government agencies had Malcolm under heavy surveillance, even when he went overseas, where he narrowly escaped death by poisoning.
To address the first Congress of the Council of African Organizations, which was having its first Congress in London, and they were interested in knowing the rate of progress or lack of progress that the Black man in America is making in his struggle for human dignity. So I was there and couldn't be here. And at moments, intervals during that time I was over there, I almost wasn't over there.
With all that Betty Shabazz was suffering, having witnessed her husband being killed, her 4 children were at her side at the time, she somehow gathered up the strength to do this interview. which we share with you now.
What was his attitude toward his family?
Well, contrary to popular belief, his attitude towards his family was a very warm one. And although my husband traveled a lot, we had a very close relationship in the sense that whenever he would go away, I could always expect a letter, if not every day, every other day. And I could always expect a phone call. And now I think the great emptiness is not so much that he's away right now, but that he's away and I'll never get another letter from him, or I won't hear from him again. And when my children began to, after he's gone for a period of time, they began to ask me different things about him. They draw pictures and write little notes for him, and they're piling up. And I guess when they really start asking about him, I don't really know exactly how to explain to him that he'll never return. I think there's a great emptiness.
In the course of his lifetime and his career, did he ever discuss with you the aims of this new organization he founded last year, the Organization for Afro-American Unity?
Well, yes, in particular, one of the aims was internationalizing the problem of the Afro-American in this country. He felt that as long as in a few states we were begging for cups of coffee or things of this sort, that we would not receive rights all over. Just as the white man is able to go all over the face of the earth and receive the same dignity and respect in one country as he does in the other. The Afro-American or the African, wherever he goes, receive indignation and disrespect. And he felt by internationalizing the problem, by helping the Africans, and in turn the African helping us to get our rights, that a black man, an Afro-American or an African, could go all over the face of the earth and receive the same dignity, the same respect as any white man. And I think that this was one of the aims, was a very good aim.
Did he ever discuss with you the chance of death, the likelihood that he would be assassinated?
Yes, we discussed it many times, and I have witnessed on several occasions different attempts being made on his life. And I think the press and the police were very unfair in their attitude towards what he was saying. They seemed to make it look as if he was just talking. One paper came out with Malcolm X claims such and such, and I even heard one person on television saying that it was all in his mind, and well, everything that he said concerning this, people tried to make it look ridiculous, tried to make him look ridiculous. Well, it finally happened, and then what just happened?
You felt, too, that he eventually would be assassinated because of his cause and his beliefs?
Yes, I mean, he died for what he believed in. Mm-hmm. He believed with his whole heart, soul, and mind in the struggle of the Afro-Americans in this country.
What about his family? You have 4 children, and you're expecting a 5th one this fall.
I'm expecting a 5th.
You talk about his love for his family and all, but I understand, and I know this is a very personal thing, but I understand he didn't have any insurance, and how could people help?
Well, one of the things, when we were black Muslims, it was one thing that we were taught never to have insurance, you know. It was a racket and this sort of thing. And this coming Friday, we had made plans to take out insurance and see the lawyer for other business.
I understand he planned to drop a will, too, this coming Friday with his lawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Sutton.
Yes, this Friday.
Well, first I should say that the family is without funds altogether, there being no insurance on Malcolm's life nor on his possessions. The children, there are 4 children, and Mrs. Shabazz, Malcolm's wife, is expecting a 5th child. So it was necessary to do something about establishing a fund for the future of them. And many persons who are supporters, persons who are not supporters, some persons who are admirers, and some persons who are just curious, and some persons who are just good-hearted and concerned about the welfare of children have made offers of money in support of them in the future, of a home for them, of schooling for the youngsters, of caring for the wife. And as a result of this, a foundation is being established.
You're asking for contributions to in lieu of flowers at this time?
We're not soliciting as though we were out on the street asking for money, but we think it would come. It will come.
As Malcolm's attorney, are you acquainted with the names of those who might have been responsible for this deed?
I know that Malcolm made a statement to the police as to who he thought might attempt to kill him. As to knowing their names, I don't know their names, no.
Would you like to say a word or two, Mrs. Malcolm X, about the charges made by the press some time ago that he returned from Red China with a lot of money, trunkloads of money?
Oh, yes. They were wondering, how he was supporting his family. And they were saying that every time he came into the country that he would, bring bucket loads, literally speaking, bucket loads of money in, from these, from Red China and countries like that. It was ridiculous.
In another area of life, at one time when he was a member of the Muslims, he seemed to have disrespect for the civil rights leaders, particularly Martin Luther King. And we noticed in recent months since he organized the Afro-American Unity Organization that he changed in his attitude toward Martin Luther King. Did he talk with you about that at all?
Yes, well, I think you'll find that his attitude changed tremendously after he left the Black Muslim movement and traveled abroad. He made 2 trips abroad. And the last one, he spent 5 months abroad, and it really broadened his scope, so to speak.
Well, they say travel broadens your scope. And as much traveling as I did during the past 5 weeks, I think I would be in bad shape if it didn't make my scope at least more broad than it was before I left. One of the things that I learned in the Muslim world, I didn't see any racism. I didn't see any conflict between the people over there because of the colors of their skin or the differences in color of skin. And in every country that I entered, there were Muslims, black, brown, red, yellow, and white. And there was no racist attitude in any of them. Then when I was in Arabia, during the pilgrimage,
shot in the back or running or choked out to death on the corner. They take the taser for his title, says the coroner. To the yellow journalist that won awards for writing facts for World Wide Web press stories, always calling them black. Civil rights violated here from P1.7 and CIA and FBI agents, threatening felons with what Big Brother once heard. Most wars are nerds and study more than if I'm on the road, nobody's curved. Professor Flusis, I'm fighting for survival. Making wars models won't happen, common as Captain Rival. Inquisition is governors and secretaries of state who got stateless on the tables like ribeye steak with no care, blood dripping. They eat blacks rare. Foreigners wearing J1 badges, pretending they're heirs to the fastest estate for the Malaxa. Stateless blood from back on horses, raw service agua. Demon thirst sweat, stealing pioneers and organs. Psychiatry, death industry, the stars selling black horses. And half-closed coffins, cause legs are missing, killing stateless people, cancer won't even see remission. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Like black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Like black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Like black lives don't matter. System, what system? Not gonna make myself no victim. Run down and kick them up, educate oneself and flip them. All of these titles are nationality strips them. Must grip reality in order to really grip them in this third dimensional illusion. Organized chaos confusion, stealing your attention. Mental inclusion, universal law, declaration of the ancient. I self-law and master from the rooftop to the basement. Movie to the spaceship, ever since all creation glaciers, celestial foundation, ocean floor to the ranges, to the mountains, to the cosmic infinite. Basically, we are way above the shit. In other words, get in tune with spirit. Take a breath and accept mental polarity, gender, rhythm, correspondence, vibration, cause and effect. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter.
More life matter, cause I think it all sound off. It gets affected when rejected when your name's off. If my perspective was direct you to replay all the news that I replay, so they want to cash off. Bury them on to the next one. No for them are burning down. Use them a cat cross. Can't believe I copied that. Can't believe I got it wrong. Trade ball, Michael Brown, after us is bang call. The afterlife, visit is a class brawl. Who they really want to see with the crown on high and the guards on free? I am free and your nothing is but your land or your country to seek your inalienable rights. The insatiable delight of knowing thyself and bringing all injustice to life. But the fight is your claim, make your sight for the bright. I'm the fight in the night. Foresight for you to realize that,
More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter. More lives matter. Black lives don't matter.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle.
But first we would like to
You are now in the host queue.
Islam, peace and love, Moors. Thank you all for tuning in. Shout out to Cujo. I just want to say before we even continue, that Moors Lives Matter song is so important. And we're going to get into that tonight. I didn't want to cut the intro, but I was saying something to Cujo earlier. And things happen the way they happen. And I just want to say, it's very interesting. We're going to touch on that in one moment. But before we get into that, let's get into this because we understand this is El Hajj Malik El Shabazz Born Day, solar return. And there's so much to cover, and we'll get into it. But I just want to say you are tuned into MHHS, Eyes Wide Open, Blog Talk Radio, Sons of Allah, for May 19th, 2022, Gregorian calendar. All right? So we're going to give honors to this very moment in the present, to everything that we can, as far as, it relates to the brother El Hajj Malik El Shabazz and the work that Moors have been putting in giving in honors. Unmuted. So I just want to say that from the jump. So let's get into this from Cujo.
Well, these were the African Arab Asian values. The only section of Europe that had a high value system during the Dark was those on the Iberian Peninsula in the Spanish Portuguese areas of France. And that high state of culture existed there because of Africans, known as Moors, that come there as well. So,
would you play that shit?
LBP,
Ain't BPP. I'm telling y'all, no one is a lawyer, so don't ask me. I know y'all are more. Just ask General Khalid. Nah, I'm a mole. Got simple enough to know I'm a mole. And ain't gonna never argue with you that I'm not a mole. The general said he's a more MVP. Won't see your greed for his name fame got me skunk drunk. You never pull the trigger, just pose with the shotgun pump. Wigging and hating, showing no love, but you're showing bacon. Licensing for ID at the police station. On top of that, no rights reserved on the contract. Dirty more finesse masters use old leaders to concats. Show their picture but won't use their best quotes. Only use the ones to bring in fiat notes from scapegoats. Kwame Touré's wife, even Warren says at their wedding. A snicker at Snick and all black organizations begging. Walking with limbs peg-legging. These conscious pirates. Fake freedom warners getting no ratings when I'm irate. Conscious. 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 I never sat down with Taj Bey one-on-one. Shooting yes, he is my target. Alim Bey is my gun. All I do is crush a lot truth. My big pun and Fat Joe. Falling on him 50 feet below. Mike Fatso. Mark conscious coon frauds up with my firing squad. Tugging at emotions hard like pulling a squad. Larry's no professor. Show me some doctor's degree, son. We'll listen to I'm African crap until I see one. I'm not asking for much, cause I give more than I ask for. Moorish MC, lay it down, not like asphalt. I won't fool though, some call me fool though. Trying to get under my skin, you must be a new bro. Old folk and full flow, lash with the tongue strap. Behind the codes wanna be gay Z and make a comeback. Not on my watch, slow till time stops. Left in shot cause the rhyme block. Open up your mind blocks. Conscious. 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 Conscious.
Galatians. We have them there. Now, these are church documents. But remember, when it came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain, the Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, Mauers and Moors. From 711 until 1485, 774 years, when we built and brought into Europe the university system, building the University of Salamanca, Salamanca in Spain, a copy of the university.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking, from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations. And then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then Afro-American or the so-called Negroes, people are a result because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
Interesting. So indeed, again, to emphasize, you are tuned into MHHS Eyes Wide Open, Sons of Allah, as we do every third Thursday. I am your host, Ms. Raheem, my left L, and I am with my brethren, Cujo Adwell L. Oh, hold up. Peace, more, you there?
Peace, more.
Hold up. Unmuted. Music issue. Hold on.
Peace, more.
Peace. All right, bet. We good.
We good.
Indeed. Hey, man, we've been saying for years that it's something special about us doing this on the third Thursday of every month.
Crazy.
And it's like it's always significant. 99% of the time, it's always something significant about the time, as it relates to our people, ourselves, the message that, those who came before us were trying to convey the best way they could. It's always something to go back and analyze, man. But I definitely, before we even get into that, want to just give thanks for you doing your music and having that clip of El Hajj, in his conversation about Moors being the ones who civilized, why it was high society, in the Iberian Peninsula, etc., giving the props to Moors, right? Not just props, but this is the actual facts. Like, he was telling the truth. Let's just say that, right? It's not about props. He was telling the truth about the history, So to be here on this day and to hear it in his own words, people say that they love those who came before us and, they celebrate, quote, Malcolm X and Black history, but he was onto something, right? He may not have figured it all out, but he was figuring it out, before he tragically went away. And, it showed in his language, because he went from saying, Negroes, American Negroes, to so-called Negroes, and, things of this nature to make a distinguishment between what they called us and who we actually were. And we know as Moorish Americans, you know, this is basic lessons, right? You have to deal with nationality. So I just wanted to say that from the jump, before we get into more things and more literature and facts and references to add on to what he was saying, because it's imperative to note that in that speech, in that clip of him talking about expanding this situation from civil rights to human rights, remind you, this is around the time of the last Civil Rights Act, right? He's saying, yo, look, this thing been in place for 10 years, and it hasn't changed anything. It was an act, a Civil Rights Act, and it hasn't really changed the conditions. Why? Well, we could say many different things. We could say, hey, you know, that's just how they are. We could say, hey, Noble Drew Ali told you, if you cling to those names and those principles that delude to slavery, you know, the worst is yet to come, you know, and those who identify as Negro, Black, and colored are classed, literally, not that they are, but they're classed as undesirables, right? And then are subject to all inferior treatments and abuses. That's what Noble Drew Ali said. That's not what I'm saying. If I misquoted, you know what I'm saying. If you feel like I misquoted, you know what I'm saying. Like, he said that, you know. If I forgot the opposed to a or whatever, and you feel like I'm misquoted, you know what I'm saying. You know what I mean? So, nah, because it's gotten to that point. It's become that petty amongst our people. You know what I mean? Like, it has become that petty, bro. I'm seeing this going on. And, you know, but the message, you know, he was eventually on to nationality, bro. Because who thinks to go to the United Nations? Something was there or becoming, and, you know, it was very evident. He was talking about jurisdiction. He was talking about United Nations and world affairs and all of this, right? That was his language. So I'm saying that to say that he was on to nationality or international aspects of life and civics. You know, whether people missed that part of what was missing and what was already there and what was lacking and all of that. This is what he ended up talking about before he checked out. See what I'm saying? So I just again want to say, when Moors today are saying, yo, listen, they don't have jurisdiction, as your El Haj Malik El Shabazz was talking about, you know, as, you know, El Haj Sharif Abdul Ali was talking about, essentially in the divine warning, by saying there's no need for the application of the 14th and 15th Amendment. Like R.V. Bay Publications did not make that up. For those who are saying, who are within the MST of A, and are saying that R.V. Bay Publications is on something different, again, we didn't make it up. Prophet Noble Drew Ali said that. So, you know, if he didn't say in his divine warning that there's no need for the application of the 14th and 15th Amendment, then y'all show us something. But that's what we know, he said. So when we could see that somehow that resounded throughout the last century, even before us this very day, you have El Haj Malik El Shabazz, who people call Malcolm X, you know, saying the same thing. Like he's saying, like the sentiment is the same either way you want to view it, like, or hear it, you know, that, yo, it's an issue of jurisdiction. This is what El Haj Malik El Shabazz was saying, who, again, most people know as Malcolm X. But this is what he was saying. There was always an issue with our people in jurisdiction. So when I'm listening to Moors who are saying, because they're members of the Moor Science Temple of America, and not all, but this is what some people are saying to slight RV Bay Publications and others, that somehow this is not something Noble Drew Ali taught about, and we are making this up. No, this is the legacy. Like, understand that. Meditate on that. That has always been what, our greats was talking about. Up to this very day, it was always a jurisdictional issue. And I say that, I want to say so much more and add on, but I definitely want to yield the floor to you. You know what I mean? Because I know there's a lot to say, but I just wanted to say that from the jump, that this issue of jurisdiction, and we could run the clip back, it's not something that's new. This has been talked about since the 60s. And I also wanted to add on, before I do yield the floor, I apologize. When he was saying it needs to be expanded from civil rights to human rights, it also reminded me of what Noble Drew Ali was saying in the Circle 7, where he was saying, there's no need, he was speaking about how we're not Negro, black, and color, because according to all true and divine records, there is no Negro, black, color attached to the human family, according to true and divine records. Like, we could be 100 years removed and people could feel how they feel, but when it comes down to the records, it is a fact that that was a label that was created to put our people in a certain legal status and others. Like, that's a fact. No matter how we feel about it, the true and divine records will let you know that that's true. But Islamo, I don't want to hog the floor too much on the intro, but how do you feel about this day and time, this moment of, acknowledgement to El Haj Malik El Shabazz, and the work that you have already, because we talked about this before, but everybody has a piece, and just where that resonates or how it resounded from what he was saying back then to this day, how do you feel about that in this day and time? Islam, or whatever you want to add on.
Peace, more. You hearing me clear?
Islam, yes.
Islam.
Okay.
Something that always stood out for me was because coming up in the Black Power and Pan-Africanism and all that, Malik El Shabazz was a focal point. He was up there as far as the reference point, other than repping for the Taurus gang and all that. There was something different about him than the other leaders, even before he really kicked it off. But one of the things that always fascinates me, and why this is always somewhere to go when this time of year comes around, going through his stuff again and just taking a look at it, is how the Black mindset really blinds us from seeing certain things, and how amazing it was for Noble Drew Ali to present the lesson of us not being Negro, black, or colored, and really destroying the illusion that we were under. All the years of being in Pan-African movement and studying from this Black Power perspective, there was never any acknowledgement of this move that he made after Mecca, going to the UN and speaking from, going from civil rights to human rights and all that stuff. Those are things just in passing. It wasn't until more science and proclaiming nationality and studying what Noble Drew Ali presented did, these things get blown up, where you actually had to sit back now and really take notice of the fact that he was onto something. He was onto something on a level that, the people who we were looking at as leadership or inspiration, they weren't really there yet. He was, we could even say with him that he was before his time, which is again why they got him out of the way, because once you start having this conversation about holding people responsible for the atrocities that they have unloaded on a particular people, the idea that our people suffer for lack of knowledge. He went out, acquired certain knowledge, and was about to help everybody get free, not just Negro, Black, colored people, but he was actually about to have everybody have this opportunity to be able to speak up for the violations of the corporations that were calling it game over, if we're talking about the 60s. Because when we go over the level of ignorance that our people were in, these people thought this stuff was over. The Negroes are done. They ain't gonna find out who they are or anything like that. And all we gotta do is keep throwing whatever in their face, use their nigger leaders against them, and this stuff is done. It's important to always acknowledge and recognize that he was starting to fight the same fight that Noble Drew Ali was presenting, that we do have a connection to being human beings. We do have a disconnection to the labels, like you were saying, him starting to say so-called, things like that. You ain't looking at that as Negro, Black, colored. You're looking at, our brother Malcolm, was murdered because he was speaking the truth and all that, when this stuff was way bigger than that. Even the idea of, them still 2022, they still calling him Malcolm X, as if that's what his name was. Even in the interviews, him talking about having the name Malik Shabazz, but because of the conditions of our people not changing, he's going to stick with Malcolm X, right? He was putting himself in this lower grade. This is the sincerity of him. He wasn't looking out for himself. He was really looking out for his people on a grand scale. He was looking out for his people, and the ignorance of the people to have these individuals run up in the ballroom, murder him, and they just talking about, they're hitting the ground and hiding under tables and all this stuff before they go run up on these people and strangle them for murdering this man. Did nothing. They're talking about, police saved them from getting killed by the people who were in attendance and all this. Highwaymen should have got kicked in their face too, because they don't have jurisdiction. Why are you even, because they didn't care about him. It's not like highwaymen cared about him like that. Why would they protect the murderers of Malik Shabazz? Why would the murderers be swarmed and highwaymen jumping in. Obviously, they had something to do with it. Among other people who we know had something to do with it, who admitted it, that they created the climate for this to happen and all that stuff. And none of those people getting strangled. And they're still around today, still being able to go rent Washington, D.C. and all that stuff. And all these people running to go march to listen to these people talk who murdered Malik Shabazz. So it's a great day when we're able to speak, especially Moors, having, the mindset that we have, being able to speak on behalf of him, because he can't speak for himself. And us having the mindsets that we have to be able to decipher certain things, be able to look into certain things, like we had up earlier, this whole idea of him going to the African Summit Conference and calling out the Africans. Like, you think you guys are going to be getting something? You think you guys are going to be getting respected if you don't assist us in our stuff? And then look, after he got murdered, look what happened to all them African nations. They were already in the shitter because of Berlin Conference and all that, right? You have an individual of the Americas going to them to stress the point to them. Listen, you think that these people aren't violating us? How are you sitting around talking about violations going on in all these other places or whatever like that? And your brothers and sisters, who you know that we're your brothers and sisters, you're not standing up for the madness going on in the Americas, strange fruit and all that stuff. You have nothing to say? Zero? Ripped all these people to shreds for them being complicit, for them being down with only calling out the stuff that they're going through, but not calling out the things that are going on globally. Going back again to this idea of his sincerity and him looking out for everybody. And the fact that these people, no different than we were talking about earlier, that these people still call Yassine Bey most deaf. They need to get slapped for disrespecting the legacy. Disrespecting the legacy. Because everybody knows that L is Moorish. Everybody knows that Bey is Moorish. Why is it so hard? Because the people don't know the truth about their nationality and birthrights. The people call themselves these fictions, which is really clouding their competence. And I'm speaking from somebody who had competence clouded. Didn't even care about the speech to African Summit Conference and all that. Didn't care about any of that. All we want to do is play this game like we honor and we respect and we uphold when we don't, when you don't have a status. You actually don't. It's actually hypocrisy. It's actually vile disrespect for people to take this position of not recognize what he was trying to do. And going back to what Ms. was saying, not recognizing that today, this is the same stuff that Moors are saying today, the same stuff that El Hajj was saying when he was around, that these people don't have jurisdiction. The only way they have jurisdiction is if you give it to them. So stop giving it to them. You need to stand up for your rights. You can't keep laying down and expecting them to not be the colonists that they are. You already know who it is that they are. We have ample examples from Moorish master teachers putting it out there. If you have any issues with these people, you don't go complain, you don't go march and picket, you start filing suits against people. People took notice of that? No, they didn't. Now, opportunity got lost. You can't even file suit now because all their boys are in there making sure that you can't file your suit. What was he doing? He wasn't going to Supreme Court and all of that. He wasn't going to federal court. He wasn't going to the medical board to go complain on them. He was taking them to the international community to bring them up on charges. How is he taking them to the international community to bring them up on charges and our people are still playing civil rights games? How is he saying, forget civil rights, we need to go to human rights, and then they fell right back into civil rights after they murdered him? These people are hypocrites and they deserve everything that they get. But we give honors, we give supreme honors to Malik Shabazz for putting his life on the line. We give honors to the whole family for sacrificing so that we can be here today on the 19th to honor him and to give him his respect that's due, that nobody gave him. And like we were saying, we always get the good days. Sons of Allah being on third Thursday of every month was divine intervention. This is not some stuff that we made up, even though we made it up. This was some divine intervention. Something else stepped in in order for us to be able to have these amazing days. You go back and check the record of for the past 7 years, 8 years of us doing Sons of Allah, that every single Thursday something was going on, whether it was astrological, whether it was historical, whether it was metaphysical, whether it was honors to some individual. Every third Thursday something was going down. So we're gonna give him his honors today, you know what I mean? And we will that you do the same, whether it's, you know, picking up the autobiography or whatever the case is, reading that, whether it's looking up the videos and watching some of those, whatever it is that you got to do, right? Whatever it is that you have to do, make sure that he gets his acknowledgement, because he, just like Noble Drew Ali, he died for us. He got murdered for us. And now we're the legacy. We're the living legacy of these Moors who were taken away from us. And the best that we could do is make sure that their name is heard, their true name is heard, right? Not the fake stuff. Make sure that their true name is heard and keep their legacy alive by putting out the right information. You know, don't put out the stuff with clean shaven FOI Malcolm and all that stuff. Put out the bearded stuff. Put that out. Right? Put out the fur fez. Put that stuff out. Right? Put out the things from after he came back from Mecca. Forget all that stuff before. Forget Detroit Red and all that BS. Forget all that. Forget clean-shaven guy that came to jail that was part of the NOI and all that stuff. Put out the stuff when he was calling them out as being pedophiles. Put that stuff out. Put out the stuff that shows the conspiracy of his assassination and the parties that were involved, and that it wasn't some Europeans and all that stuff. No different than when we talk about Noble Drew Ali. Put out all the people who are calling themselves reincarnated Noble Drew Ali and all that stuff, so we know that these people did a number, not just on the individual, but also to slow us down so that we can't figure this stuff out, or we can't make it to the promised land and all that stuff. So I'm gonna get off the bike and you know, say honors to all the Moors for being here. Give thanks for being here. Honors to you, Ms. Honors to MHHS for allowing us the platform. And let's give honors to Malik Shabazz, Islam. I think you're muted, Ms.
Yes, pardon me. I apologize about that. For sure, bro. I definitely am in line with everything you were saying, man. In correlation with that, though, I want to get into this book of equity from the Institutes of American Law. I don't know if you could put that on the screen at the moment.
Yeah, I got you.
But I feel like
to get it.
But honestly, man, I feel like for those who joined maybe a couple minutes late, that maybe we need to just play that clip back real quick to correlate what he was saying with what we are about to get into. In all due respect to his, eventual, the maturation of his philosophy and his views before he checked out.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word. His maturation. That's a good word. That's a perfect way to put it.
Facts indeed. Because he did. You could see it if you go back and look at everything he was saying and watch the videos. You could see the maturation. And when he was reaching his apex, they plucked him. But I just want to say, because this is so relevant, again, to what we have been saying and what's about to be said. While you pull up the book of equity, I'm going to go in and play this clip again, just for the record.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking, from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context, or out of the domestic context, or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations. And then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle, or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American, or the so-called Negroes, will result, because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good, or make them look better than they actually are, by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside, and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
Now, with that being said, Malik Shabazz himself, who they taught the masses, was Malcolm X, like you pointed out earlier, right? They need to put some respect on his name or appellation, right? Because of what he evolved to, what his maturation was. But when he was talking about human rights in different countries, I just want to say this, from the Institutes of American Law, enumeration 3,726. And again, I want to put an emphasis on the fact that this is by John Bouvier, and the Institutes of American Law is exactly what it says, because we have to keep in mind geography, right? As far as universal and, you know, different countries and all of this, we have to keep in mind the fact that America is north, south, and central. The United States of America is not America. Canada, what they call Canada, is North America. What they call Mexico is Central America. What they call Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, Honduras, all of this is South America, right? But it's still all America. So we're reading from the Institutes of American Law, which encompasses the colony of the United States. And it says here, in correlation to what, you know, the brother Malik Shabazz was saying, who most know as Malcolm X, this is in alignment with what he was just saying in the clip we just played. So it says maxims are rules or principles of law, universally admitted as being just and consonant with reason. That's the mind. They are something like axioms in geometry. You can talk math, it's not an issue. It says, many maxims are merely the statement in short and pithy sentences of principles which claim the assent of mankind. These existed before the law. I need y'all to really let that sink in. These existed before the law, for it has been well observed that nations have been found without laws and none without maxims. So there's been many nations to have been found without any laws, but no nation has been found to not have maxims. Let's keep that in mind in correlation with what he was saying about the United Nations and national principles and action, right? And this is Institutes of American Law, Book of Equity, enumeration 3,726 or 3726. This is the fifth book. So nationality has a correlation in law and equity. Because if I go back a couple of enumerations before, it goes into the difference between law and equity, and why that is also mentioned in the Constitution, where it says in all cases in law and equity. I know we spoke about this before, but it's so important to remember this now, right? Everything is not always about laws and statutes. Like some things are about natural justice, and some things are about equity, which has many branches, including natural justice, right? So when it says there's been nations that have been found without laws, but none without maxims. These are just basic principles. You know what I mean? Like amongst nations. I can name a few, but some they're slave-minded listening, and I'm gonna just say, we'll get into that a little later. I'll add on, but there's many maxims amongst nations, right? So such maxims may be considered as fragments of the natural law, which was promulgated at the beginning of the world. Again, these words are not my own. These are not RBB Publications words. These are not Cujo's words. We're just the channels showing you where these words are at and what we stand on, essentially. And this is the Institutes of American Law, Book of Ethics. So it says, of this kind, or again, I'm not going to butcher Latin, but if you look at the reference that I just gave, you can read it for yourself. It says, other maxims derive their effect from the law and have been adopted after the experience of ages. Most of the examples we shall give in this chapter are of this kind. Sometimes the law arises from the maxim, and the later assumes the office of the former, hence the necessity of understanding them thoroughly. After having inspired the law, maxims remain and watch over it and in its midst, somewhat like a lamp in the midst of the sanctuary, enlightening the points where the law applies and showing those where it does not. Right? So I just wanted to say that and add that on to what Malik Shabazz was saying as far as, taking it to the United Nations and human rights versus civil rights, etc. These are actual points of law. This is not feel-goodism. Like they were dealing with remedies that our people needed to comprehend in a certain mentality to function in the civic way. Dealing with nationality. So, and math and the law, because everything has to be enumerated. So math and law also go in. So when it says many maxims are merely the statement in short and pithy sentences of principles which claim the ascent of mankind, these existed before the law, for it has been well observed that nations, not niggers, not Negroes, blacks, coloreds, whites, trailer park trash, none of those derogatory terms. It says, it has been well observed that nations have been found without laws, and no nation has been found without maxims. When we're dealing with nationality, we need to understand and overstand the difference and how that applies in equity and how that applies in law, because law doesn't exist without equity. And the Constitution protects all cases dealing with law and equity. So again, I can't stress enough that some situations are more dealing with equity than the letter of the law, even though the law of the land protects all cases in law and equity. Article 3, Article 6 of the Constitution, for starters. But in violation of that, like Malik Shabazz was speaking about, there's a venue. And the fact that they don't have jurisdiction, literally that is an issue at law. That's a lawful issue. Mm-hmm. Legal, lawful, however you may look at it. It's an issue. When you're dealing with these types of things. So when he's saying they don't have jurisdiction, we need to be on the world stage. That's prime time, right? What would you say to the world? that they could recognize as far as what we're dealing with, what you're dealing with, what, you know, the actual situation is. It's good for some, bad for others, or, you know, however you want to look at it. But on a national and international level, we should know that there's basic principles, right? Before you shun them more for saying they don't have jurisdiction. It's basic principles dealing with nationality, understanding the political differences between us that have, you know, very paramount, you know, status in the things that we're dealing with when it comes to dealing with them. So yeah, with that more, I'm gonna yield the floor for now. I'm going to pull up something else in the book of equity as it relates to law and international law, or what he was saying. But I feel like also the fact that it mentions no nation. I mean, there has been nations found without laws, but then there's been no nation that has been found without maxims. That means something. It's not about the statute and code and, you know, rule 4A, B, C. Like, no, it's deeper than that when you're dealing with human rights opposed to civil rights and nationality versus statelessness, or, you know what I mean, being tagged with a warship name. Because as far as I could correlate that message to what I know about Moors and Noble Drew Ali, you know, Noble Drew Ali was mentioning the aspect of clinging to names and principles that allude to slavery, right? So, you know, to fulfill the other part of that message, which has been around decades before he mentioned it, still is paramount in that mentioning of that aspect of human rights or civil rights. And it's not like, because remember, yes, we do have civil rights, but what Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, who people call Malcolm X, was highlighting. The highlight was the fact that it was the Civil Rights Act, not civil rights itself. It was the act, the legislation, which couldn't have been enforced in many different places. And he was calling out the fact that it was the Southerners who came up with this. So when he was talking about it not being able to be enforced in the North and all of this, you got to understand, like, this correlates to what Noble Drew Ali was saying about traveling in the South and examining conditions there, and it being the work of his people that is bringing disgrace, dishonor, and shame to any nation that lives the life. And I just want to leave that there for now more. I'm going to yield the floor to you. But yeah, I just wanted to add that on. Like, the concept is recognized in law books before we all existed. Like, every nation has to be respected for their maxims, whatever those may be. And I want to add this last piece on. When it comes to nationality, I don't know why Moors receive so much hate. Like, anybody can have or utilize their nationality to do business. Some people call it commerce. Other aspects of it may be industry, even though they may be related. But, like, I never heard of anybody being mad at any Italians for having an Italian, right? Like, just because they say they're Italian, nobody hates them. Like, why is that? Mm-hmm. I never heard about anybody being classed as some other type of citizen because they own an Irish bar and grill. But it's common to see an Irish bar and pub or bar and grill or whatever it is. Like, people use their nationality to do many different things. Or why is it such a hate when it comes to Moors? Because it is a real nationality. Like it is, in fact, and in law, Moroccans were the first to recognize the quote United States. It's a reason for that. But I'm just saying, why is there so much hate out there when we're dealing with nationality and say we're Moors? We got our own saying, nah, we not Moors, we niggas, basically. You know what I mean? And we gonna be niggas, and that's what it is. That's what I hear when I hear them say that we're not Moors.
Mm-hmm.
The way they're speaking, it's like, they're gonna be slaves and, all this other, it's just crazy. But I'm just saying, other nationalities, as far as dealing with civic society, people could feel whatever way they want about them, but you can't take them out of the lawful or legal right or human right just because they're Irish, just because they're Italian. And what I mean by that is, if you have an Italian restaurant or you go to an Italian restaurant or whatever, just because they're Italian, you can't say like, oh, these are bad people because they got an Italian restaurant and they rep for their nationality. You could go to their history and feel however you want, but their nationality is not prohibiting them from doing business or engaging in economics or commerce or industry or whatever. So if it's about equity and equality, right, and every nation has been found to not lack on maxims, but there has been nations that lack on laws and not have laws. I'm just saying, what is it about nations where Moors are hated so much by those operating on our land? Like, why is that? And they could say Italian restaurant, whatever, but we know that's North African cuisine. Bro, when we think of international and nationality and these national aspects El-Haj Malik was speaking about, and in I guess we would have to call it the apex of his maturation, because the rest of the climb to the apex got clipped. He eventually started talking about these national principles, bro. And I know I don't ever want to forget that or let that be lost in anything I'm involved with.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're not black, you got those who are taking it like we're saying we're not the same people, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying Negro, black, and color are coons, right? These are brand names to detach us from the ability, the legal and lawful ability to do what El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz was saying, what Noble Drew Ali was saying about dealing with nationality and human rights. Because according to Noble Drew Ali, there's no Negro, black, and color attached to the human family by all true and divine records. And taking those brands and doing these things wouldn't really be the ultimate remedy. We have to be in propria persona. We have to know ourselves, our nationality, to do these things. And I just think that had El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, or who people call Malcolm X, had some more years to live, this would have been made very crystal clear. That's how I feel, bro. Like, it's very obvious looking at this maturation. And I yield the floor for now.
Peace more.
Islam.
And then going back to enumeration 3726, something else stood out with regard to the correlation with Noble Drew Ali and a couple other reference points. Sometimes the law arises from the maxim, and the latter assumes the office of the former. Hence the necessity of understanding them thoroughly. And then that that brought to my mind the whole idea of Drew Ali having the Moorish movement be divine and national, that the national arises from the divine. And what it appears to be is that the national has assumed the office of the divine, and people are chasing the divine, chasing the national, as that's where the remedy is, not recognizing that there's something that predates that, right? It also is correlated to the good brother C.M. Bay, who told us in the Zodiac Constitution that our Moorish Constitution is the foundation. Our Zodiac Constitution is the foundation of these people's Magna Carta and Emancipation Proclamation and myth of white supremacy. And it appears like the Moorish Constitution, Zodiac Constitution foundation office has been taken over by the Magna Carta Emancipation White Supremacy Office, and people are now looking at that, not realizing that there's something that's a foundation of that. And this idea of, because it says it so clear, and it's so eloquent that we'll put it out there again. After having inspired the law, maxims remain and watch over it, and in its midst, somewhat like a lamp in the midst of a sanctuary, of the sanctuary, enlightening the points where the law applies and showing those where it does not. So the foundation being the maxim, going back again to these correlations and the Holy Quran, chapter 4 with the ministry of death, that it is selfishness to make one wish to call again to earth departed souls. Let your mother rest in peace. Let her noble life, the maxim, be strength and inspiration unto you. A crisis in your life has come, and you must have a clear conception, right? Clear conception, the light, because of the death, because of the overshadowing, because of the maxim, because of the divine. You're not going to have the access to national because of the nationality. And then people following the brands and the labels, they don't have a clear conception of the work that they're called to do. They actually are blinded from having a clear conception because they've taken, going back again to the enumeration, because they've taken the law and think or assume that the law is what it is. When we go again to this idea of sometimes the law arises from the maxim is the great law of peace. And the latter assuming the office of the former is the Constitution and all that, and people are looking at that as that's where you should be going, when the reality is that there's something that predates that. There's something that's before that needs to be given consideration. Hence, the necessity of understanding them thoroughly, not just taking one side, not just looking at it from one perspective, but actually being the lamp in the midst of the sanctuary, enlightening all the points so that you could see where this law applies. And it might not apply where you want it to apply. Again, going back to Drew Ali saying that this is divine and national. And people looking at well, I got court tomorrow, so I got to make sure I got the paper in, and I got to make sure that or whatever, when really you should have probably meditated before you even did the paperwork. You should have probably, written the writ before you typed it out. You should have put things in a broader perspective, so that in understanding them thoroughly, you would have a lot more to grasp. By understanding divine constitution and bylaws, you'll understand zodiac constitution. And again, the former taking the office, the latter assuming the office of the former. Know without a shadow of a doubt, whether we're talking about El-Hajj, Malik el-Shabazz, whether we're talking about Noble Drew Ali, whether we're talking about CMB, whether we're talking about RV Bay Publications, whether we're talking about Moore's Order of the Round Table, there's a necessity of understanding them thoroughly. Don't be vague with one over the other, because they apply in multiple streams at the same time. And it has to be a well-rounded perspective. Just like going into the thing, many maxims are merely the statement in short. Many maxims are merely the statement in short. And pithy sentences of principles which claim the ascent of mankind. This is not some, just limited to our time frame. Such maxims may be considered as fragments of the natural law. Going back again to the idea of the law arising from the maxim and the latter assuming the office of the former. Now you're looking at maxims, and then you're chasing those when there's law that predates the maxim. There's natural law that predates that. And then you're looking at the natural law, and then like, oh yeah, the natural law is where it's at, when there's universal law that predates that. And all these things are hinged to each other. And the more that we grasp the full scope, just like when we talk about with Drew Ali presenting that this is divine and that it's national. And we have to look at it through those two lenses in order to get the full perspective. If you decide to pick one over the other, you're already lost. And many people are lost just for that simple error in their maneuvering, that they don't see the enlightening points. They see the dark spots. They see the shadows. And then you already know shadows and illusion. That's not where you're supposed to be at. After having inspired the law, maxims remain to watch over it. That's the foremothers and forefathers that we're supposed to go back to their mindset. That even after they did what they did, even though El-Hajj did what he did for our people, even though he's inspired what it is that we're doing today, and we don't see him, and you're listening to us talk about this stuff, it's really the spirit of El-Hajj. It's really the spirit of Noble Drew Ali. And again, the whole idea of it being watched over is the protection, is the metaphysical aspect of it. The idea that it will protect you once you honor it. It will protect you once you give it acknowledgement. But if you don't, you know that the worst is yet to come. Expect your ass to get kicked if you don't follow along with the program or along with the order of operations. Bed mass, since we're talking about the math and all that. Right? If you don't follow bed mass, you're not going to get the right answer. I don't care what you think you know. Right? But that was a good one. The 3726. Having this idea of knowing that yes, there's the maxim, yes, there's the law, but there's also natural law. There's also constitutional law. There's also a higher force. It ain't just about us in the flesh. There's a bigger thing going on. There's a bigger picture that we need to consider. And once we consider those greater ideas, right? This whole thing about the lamp in the midst of the sanctuary enlightening the points, forget points. The whole place will be lit up if we really apply this in the correct perspective. And again, that is only going to happen when Moors take, studying serious, take, knowing thyself serious, taking all those things that Noble Drew Ali said in mere statements, in short and pithy sentences of principles, which really is the ascent of mankind. Because everybody's already on game. Just like we're saying, ain't nobody debating the Italians at their restaurant. Ain't nobody debating the Congolese with whatever they got. And as soon as more start talking, though, now everybody wants to question things and they're not ready. And well, should we do it? And well, what do we do next? And all that stuff when it's already been laid down what you're supposed to do. How about just do it and stop trying to figure your way out, like Drew Ali said. Just follow him and you'll make it through. Look at what was presented. Take it into consideration before you act. Because without taking it into consideration, your actions are probably going to be warped. It has to be given its proper space in order for it has to be given its proper space in order for it to manifest how you want it to manifest. All right. I don't know if you found that other one more, but I yield the floor on that.
Islam, indeed. Yes, because I want to talk about equity again. We touched on 3726 from the Book of Equity, but I also wanted to touch on 3724, right? Because, because people look from what people are doing on YouTube and all of this, they look and say, oh yeah, Moors are divided. But the only principles that's really going to unify us if we're in or out the temple. One thing I think we all agree on, but may not all understand, is the 5 principles, right? Love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Those are the undisputed 5 principles that Noble Drew Ali laid out, no matter what it be, our political differences or ideologies or whatever it is. So again, from the Institutes of American Law, 5th Book of Equity, Chapter 1, enumeration 3724. It says there is a kind of equity which is founded in natural justice. And then there's a comma. But I just wanted to say, and I wanted to highlight right here, in the interest of Moors worldwide, the fact that it says natural justice. And for me personally, that is the first time I've ever seen in a law book, a law correlation, what they call natural justice.
Yeah.
Sort of natural law, but natural justice, that just hit different. Knowing that I'm a Moor, knowing about the 5 principles Noble Drew Ali was laying out for us to coexist and correlate and get along. So when it says natural justice, right, I'm like, oh wow. So let me bring that back. It says there is a kind of equity which is founded in natural justice and honesty and right, and which arises ex equo et bono. This is called natural equity. Natural equity. like we hear about natural law, and we have, you know, references to point to that. But there's natural justice and there's natural equity. It says it corresponds precisely with the definition of justice or natural law. So I guess they're all correlated because it says it corresponds precisely with the definition of justice or natural law. And I was just saying, you know, the distinguishment between natural equity, natural justice, natural law. But that's the very next sentence. It corresponds precisely with the definition of justice or natural law, which is a constant and perpetual will to give to every man what is his. This kind of equity embraces so wide a range that human tribunals have never attempted to enforce it.
Now, quick interjection, more. Before you carry on, when you look up natural, remember what we just read about the whole idea of the former holding the office of the latter. When you look up the definition for natural equity in the law dictionary, it's giving you everything that's right here, word for word. It's giving you everything that's in the Institutes of American Law. So again, going back to the idea of we're looking at the law dictionary as, oh yeah, this is the definition of the whatever, when it comes from something that predates it. The law dictionary is actually a reference. That's not really the definition of it. The definition of it is what's right here. You look up natural justice. Natural justice is telling you what's in the Institutes of American Law. So the idea that all these things feed off of each other, everything is hinged to each other. There's no separate, you know, this is over here and then that's there. Everything is, what did Jwali say? Every living thing is bound by a cord. Going back to this correlation. Right? But I yield the floor. Go ahead, Mark.
Nah, bro, I appreciate that add-on. Now, the definition that you say is saying the same thing. Is that's the fourth edition, Henry Cavill Black's Law Dictionary, or what?
That's the actual the law.com dictionary.
Oh, okay.
So it says that which is founded in natural justice, natural equity, natural equity, that which is founded in natural justice, in honesty and right, and which arises ex quo et bono. It corresponds precisely with the definition of justice or natural law, which is a constant and perpetual will to give to every man what is his. The kind of equity embraces so wide a range that human tribunals have never attempted to enforce it, etc.
Say that word. Yeah, they had to get it from there verbatim. If that's online, and this law book is from 1870, post, you know, so-called Negroes thinking that they just got free.
Mm-hmm.
Right? 1870. So I'm sure that any people, like, because people got all types of emotions and feelings online, but I'm talking about to those who study and reference and have references and can share reference points. You know what I mean? They know hands down what we're saying as a people is right and exact.
Is right. Yep.
They know it's already. It's not even nothing, you know, they're just in the conversation with the beginning of the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
Like that could be where the conversation ends. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's real talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as any of these naysayers. But
to continue from enumeration 3724 and where you left off with the exact language that it says here from 1870. It says, and continues to say in the Institutes of American Law, Book of Equity, it says, every code of laws has left many matters of natural justice or equity wholly unprovided for. 1870. What they were saying. Every code of laws has left many matters of natural justice or equity wholly unprovided for. And I just want to analyze that statement because it didn't say the Constitution did, because the Constitution mentions all cases in law and equity, but it says every code of laws. It didn't say the Constitution. It said every code of laws has left many matters of natural justice or equity wholly unprovided for, from the difficulty of framing general rules to apply to them, from the almost impossibility of enforcing a compliance with its requirements, and from the doubtful nature of the policy of attempting to give a legal sanction to duties of imperfect obligation, such as charity, gratitude, or kindness. Deferring altogether from this, there is another kind called civil equity. This is deduced from and governed by such civil maxims as are adopted by any particular state or community. This alone will form the subject of this book. Civil equity may be taken in two senses in jurisprudence. It is in the first place that rule of right which determines the decisions of a judge when he has to follow the strict rule to which he is obliged to conform by the requirements of the law. And secondly, which is its true technical meaning. The true technical meaning of the law. It is justice exercised not according to the rigor of the law, but softened and moderated so as to attain the views of the legislator. It is to correct the law when it is defective by reason of its universality. And I just want to say right there, Noble Drew Ali said he was a universal prophet and that his philosophy would be universal.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about civil equity, right, and, you know, the rigor of the law is supposed to be softened and moderated so as to attain the views of the legislator. It is to correct the law. Civil equity is to correct the law when it is defective by reason of its universality. So if it's not universal, the law is defective, and that's where equity steps in. But people are acting like the Constitution is just based on all law when it's based on law and equity. And that is where I think we're getting confused. So it says, it continues to say in enumeration 3724 that law is nothing without equity. And I'm going to say that again. Law is nothing without equity, and equity is everything, even without law. This is not me saying, there's a reference point, again, for anybody just tapping in. This is the Institutes of American Law, Book of Equity, enumeration 3724, 3724.
It says law is nothing without equity, and equity is everything, even without law. You gotta let that sink in. Especially if you think law is color of law, and then what they're doing under color of law is actually law. If you think that, you gotta really comprehend the difference between equity and law, and the Constitution securing both perspectives of law and reserving the original jurisdiction to the Supreme Court. This Institutes of American Law. Law is nothing without equity. Again, I'm going to bring this back and continue. It says law is nothing without equity, and equity is everything, even without law. Those who perceive what is just and what is unjust only through the eyes of the law never see it as well as those who behold it with the eyes of equity. Law may be looked upon in some manner as an assistance for those who have a weak perception of right and wrong. In the same way that optical glasses are useful to those who are short-sighted or whose visual organs are deficient. Equity in its true and genuine meaning is the soul and the spirit of the law. Positive law is construed and rational law is made by it. Now we know that the meaning of words is the spirit of law, and then reasoning is the soul of the law. Those are maxims that you can look up. You know what I mean? You ask, what is the spirit of the law? The meaning of words. What is the soul of the law? You know, like these are real concepts of law, because the answer to the soul of the law is the rational mind. The spirit of the law is the meaning of words. These are actual factual maxims. So your reasoning mind is the soul of the law, and the spirit of the law is the meaning of words or etymology. Words wasn't making nothing up. It says positive law is construed and rational law is made by it. When in certain cases, the law is clear, it will be doing inequity to depart from it under the pretext of tempering and modifying its dispositions by particular principles of greater equity. So, in certain cases, it is an inequity to depart from the law. If the law says, look, the law being the Constitution, all people, you're immune to unreasonable searches and seizures. You know what I mean? And if they were to try to do anything, they have to have a warrant, particularly describing the persons and places to be searched and the things to be seized, right? Like there's certain times if like they depart from that, it's an inequity. It may not be a legal infraction. It is an inequitable action, which equity is everything, even without law. So you got to understand, while you're looking for a code or a statute or whatever to say, hey, look, this is how they broke the law. No, it may be something as simple as it's just not right. That's just not right. That's inequitable.
Yeah.
Forget whatever code, statute, ordinance, the way this thing came about is just not right. I don't care what rule, 841, whatever it is. That's not what makes this the issue. It's just not right. So there's more states now legalizing, quote, marijuana or cannabis or whatever. And it's viewed different in different territories or states at the moment. Who's to say what's right or wrong? Right? This has been a reason they have been using to even unlawfully search our people. Or we're looking for this and that and that. You know, but now that's taken away from them. Can't use that as an excuse no more. But in some places they can. So when I'm hearing people say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, and you can't do this, well, there's different rules in different places. You may be in a slave state and don't understand that that's what you're up against.
And it may not be that they may be in a slave state. They are, because if we're gonna talk about natural law and positive law and things of that nature, and you're gonna tell me, you know, people getting kidnapped for lettuce, and people getting kidnapped for chive, and people getting kidnapped for aloe vera, and people getting kidnapped for whatever else that's green. Obviously, you're short-sighted. Obviously, you know, the optical glasses aren't really useful, and you should probably put them on. You know, they're not serving you a purpose sitting on the table. If you're short-sighted, you better put them on so you can get the true and genuine meaning of what's going on, so you can get to the soul and the spirit of the law, that this is not mere opinion. This is not you can make a plant be illegal. You know, forget the Constitution. Forget the right to whatever that you read somewhere the right said. Use your common sense, and you'll probably figure the stuff out sooner. You know, cannabis is a plant. They weren't saying when they wrote the Constitution on hemp paper, they weren't talking about that they did something illegal. When they used to make parachutes out of hemp, they weren't talking about they were making something illegal. How is it all of a sudden that this thing is now illegal? Oh, because, you know, people are looking at the code or what these colonists say as the law, or what these colonists say as what the truth is, when there's truth that predates their truth that they're claiming as the truth, which is actually a lie. I yield the floor.
Facts, bro. Major facts. So it says, when in certain cases the law is clear, it will be doing inequity to depart from it under the pretext of tempering and modifying its dispositions by particular principles of greater equity. Otherwise, the law established to give to all men an invariable rule for their conduct would have nothing certain, and the citizens would in vain attempt to repose under the shadow of its dispositions. Let that sink in for a minute. So their temperament to deny or, you know, try to reclassify people's citizenship or whatever, all of this is against equity. It may not be always about law. It says equity is not an arbitrary opinion of the judge. It is subject to certain and fixed rules. For unless it be directed by science, Moorish science, Temple of America, Moorish Holy Temple of Science, listen up. It says equity is not an arbitrary opinion of the judge. It is subject to certain and fixed rules, for unless it be directed by science, it becomes uncertain and unknown, and in such case, the magistrate must tremble
while sitting in the temple of justice. Period. Yeah.
And then also too, you could take, just like we took science, and he said more science temple and all that stuff. You could take judge, magistrate, and then you could put grand sheik there, grand governor, grand secretary, and all the different titles that people are going to claim in order to get away from the certain and fixed rules and do whatever they think that they could do. Call themselves reincarnated and all that stuff when you really should be trembling while sitting in those seats of power that you've been abusing all these years. Go ahead, more.
Facts. Major facts. So we bring that back. It says equity is not an arbitrary opinion of the judge. It is subject to certain and fixed rules, or unless it is directed by science, it becomes uncertain and unknown. And in such case, the magistrate must tremble while sitting in the temple of justice. His mind will wander in pursuit of a phantom of equity, purely imaginary. Frequently, what appears just to one man seems unjust to another. And yet both act in good faith. Each sustains the side he has adopted, apparently with arms of equal power, which renders it extremely difficult to decide to whom the victory shall be awarded. But equity like truth, and I'm going to say that again, but equity like truth, love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, may I interject and then bring that back. But equity like truth is but a unit. It must manifest itself by its own power, and it is never better seen than through the medium of the law. There it is, made manifest, there it is made manifest, and it may be adopted without fear of a mistake. Pardon me more. I'm going to have to yield the floor real quick. Just got to get my plug to continue on my computer. So I'll pardon me real quick.
It's all good, more. There it is made manifest, and it may be adopted without fear of a mistake, because the law must be considered as the wisdom and foresight of the legislature, and he is presumed to have studied equity and embodied it in his work. To classify our inquiries, we will consider first the general rules and maxims in equity, second, the assistant jurisdiction of courts of equity, third, the current jurisdiction of courts of equity, fourth, the exclusive jurisdiction of such courts. There it is made manifest, and it may be adopted without fear of a mistake, because the law must be considered as the wisdom and foresight of the legislature. The law must be considered as the wisdom and foresight of the legislature. So if the legislature is talking codes and ordinances and acts, then obviously there's no wisdom and foresight there, and they're probably about to railroad you. And he is presumed to have studied equity and embodied it in his work. So the standard of the legislature is to have equity embodied in the work. Because remember what we were talking about earlier, that, where did it go? Remember you're talking about earlier that equity, or when in certain cases the law is clear, it would be doing iniquity to depart from it under the pretext of tempering and modifying its dispositions by particular principles of greater equity, when in certain cases the law is clear. It would be doing iniquity to depart from it. All right? It would be doing iniquity to depart from it. So the legislature, the judge, the magistrate, the grand sheik, the executive, whoever, the municipal, whoever, anybody, it is presumed that they have studied equity and that their study of equity is embodied in the work that they're doing, right? No different than Drew Ali said, 5 principles. And you have to live by those if you're going to say that you're a Moor. You're going to have to study divine constitution if you're saying that you're true to this. You're going to have to study your Quran if you're saying that you're true to this. Because it's presumed, once you say that you're a Moor, it's presumed that you already have these things in your bag. You should already have these things in your bag. Constitution, right? To classify our inquiries, we will consider first the general rules and maxims in equity. So the general rules and maxims in equity have to be of first consideration, right? No different than when we talk about status being the first issue, and that's just supposed to be the standard. And as soon as you start talking about, or as soon as you start dealing with people who are telling you, well, no, jurisdiction is the first issue. Well, then if jurisdiction is the first issue, how come they even say right here, second, the assistant jurisdiction of the courts of equity? Jurisdiction second, even in equity. Status is first, the general rules and maxims of equity. Second, the assistant jurisdiction of equity. Third, the current jurisdiction of the courts of equity. Fourth, the exclusive jurisdiction of such courts. And they should probably have exclusive jurisdiction if they're going to be adjudicating in the courts. If they don't have exclusive jurisdiction, then they're probably not dealing in equity. If they don't have current jurisdiction, they're probably not dealing in equity. Right? Islam, are you plugged in?
Peace, more, yes, definitely. I got it right. I made it right real quick. I apologize.
Well, you good, Mar. You straight. Oh yeah, and don't forget, for all the people who's online, it's 10:50 right now. So if you want to be getting your questions in or anything like that, make sure you call the number on the bottom of the screen and get on the Blog Talk line. If you're going to have questions or anything like that, you got 10 minutes before you're shut out. There's a lot more.
Yes, that's no doubt. Thank you for mentioning that. Because there were a couple hands up, and I apologize. I should have acknowledged them. But yeah, a couple people dropped. But for anybody who may want to add on, question anything we're saying, whatever it is that you feel or think about what we're saying, if you want to share it, you could definitely call in. You have about 10 minutes, but I'm going to say this 3 times so that everybody's given an ample chance to tune in and add on in the last hour between 11 and 12. The guest call-in number is 563-999-3403. All right, and I'm going to say that again. You know, the guest call-in number is 563-999-3403. Also, for anybody listening, it is running at the bottom of Canaanland Moore's YouTube page. You have about 10 minutes to call in, raise your hand, add on.
however you like, you know. But yeah, so to get back to this book of equity, because one of, you know, El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz points of view was dealing with equality, right? And we know equity, equality, equinox, equal day, equal night, whatever it is, all dealing with that, you know. So it says, before we proceed to inquire in what cases courts of equity exercise jurisdiction, it will be proper to take a short view of the nature of equity and the maxims by which it is governed. Courts of equity are bound by the laws as much as courts of law. The difference is this: when the law is clear and beyond a doubt, both must obey it and enforce its mandates. But the legislator cannot foresee all cases which may arise. In cases of this kind, many that happen may fall, if not within the letter, within the spirit of the law. And I'm going to say that again and elaborate. So it says courts of equity are bound by the laws as much as courts of law. The difference is this: when the law is clear and beyond a doubt, both must obey it and enforce its mandates. So both being the courts of equity and the courts of law, right? Because there's levels to it. And both are protected by the Constitution. So if the Constitution states that in all cases in law and equity, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction, whether you're dealing with a court of equity or a court of law, they both are bound to that. That's the law. But equity makes the law. And if it's not equitable, it wouldn't even make real de jure law, not color of law. So that's why, you know, real talk. But that's why, you know, both courts of equity and law are mentioned in the law of the land, which is the Constitution. Not code, statute, whatever. Like the law of the land, you know. So it says the difference is this: when the law is clear, such as, let's say, the First Amendment, people have the right to freedom of speech, right? Freedom of expression, freedom of religion. That's clear. It's not a court of law or equity that could say anything contrary to the law, which makes it clear. You have the freedom to exercise your religious freedom. You have the right. It's a secured right. It's a protected right by the law of the land. You have this basic right, right? And whether you take that into, you know, being a divine and national being and, you know, sovereign of the land or whatever, if that's your religious convictions, if you feel like your holy day is Friday, and you're saying as well that, you know, it's connected to Genesis 1:26 through 28, because, you know, man was manifested on the sixth day, or, you know, the questionnaire, 101 questionnaire, and you're saying you were made in the image of life and likeness of God, and that's why you're free, right? Whatever it is, you know, that's secured law to live by that. If that's really what you believe. It's law to be able to live accordingly by the First Amendment. So the law is clear. So there's not a court of equity or law who could depart from the law legally or lawfully, you know what I mean, and be in the right. People do this, violate people's rights, but that doesn't mean that they're right because they got the assumed position, you know what I mean? Or they're operating, not just color of law, but color of authority. So a lot of people forget that aspect of colors, right? So you got color of law and there's color of authority. And a lot of people assume because somebody puts on this robe or whatever that they have this authority. And that's color of authority.
have on this suit or this badge or whatever it is, this color of authority. You know, and when we can distinguish that from just because they said it or don't agree with it, you know, that means that it's the law. No, like, that could be color of law. Yeah, you know, a lot of people may go through that, but that's what happens under color of law. That's not real law. So when Moores is talking about these indigenous rights and these different rights of right to travel, you know what I mean, right to self-identify, like these are real de jure law and equity principles, justice principles. This is not something that we made up. That's been the legacy. So it says courts of equity are bound by the law as much as courts of law. The difference is this: when the law is clear and beyond a doubt, both must obey it and enforce its mandates. But the legislator cannot foresee all cases which may arise. In cases of this kind, many that happen may fall, if not within the letter, within the spirit of the law. These cases, thus out of the letter, are said to be within. Hold up. I guess let me take it. Hold up. Just for the record. Please, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you're a little choppy, but no, listen. Brother Supreme, you just called me, and we are live on Sons of Allah, me and Cujo. Oh, man, my bad, man. I apologize. Nah, I just merged you because I just went with the flow of things. You know what I mean? Being in the present.
It's love.
It is funny. You get the mom, Sheik, because I was just on his Instagram live show he did earlier, addressing some guy, addressing some. That's cool.
It's love.
You see how the Hebrews work? Yeah.
You already know.
But no, I know y'all on there. I'm not going to stay long. I wanted to talk to you, but I know y'all doing the show. Man, I just wanted to put some good energy in your ear about the music that I'm putting out, bro. I mean, I can try you after the show. Say that. I don't know. I just felt like I didn't know if you was tuned in, tapped in, was trying to call in. I didn't want to ignore your call, but I felt like, yo, let me just take. Nah, actually, the answer to say call you, bro, and I just wanted to call you. It's nothing happens by chance. Everything is written in the stars.
Everything.
You already know.
Everything.
Yeah. And I'm glad to hear from you, my big brother Sheik. Hey, you get a chance, just call me.
Yeah.
You get a chance. I'm not going to spend everything.
Yeah, no, I got the message. I'm gonna call you tomorrow.
Like I said, I've been doing some music, y'all. Check it out. Can I do a quick plug right there? Do your plug,
bro. You already know.
You guys. Look, I'm doing a new genre, and my whole thing is, love is one of our principles. So I'm putting that into the atmosphere. I'm doing my best to bring, love to the music culture, because we have so much of this demonic music, and I can, my brother Grand Sheik can vouch for that. We got too much demonic music out there. We got drill, we got all types of hate music, but I put out a new genre called Melodic Soul. So if y'all can go check it out, please go to my channel, Supreme Space EL Space Topic DOPIC, and subscribe, like, and share. Let's put this love back into the music, y'all, because times are changing. So all that demonic and drill and all that is going out the door. So let's get this off the right way, y'all. Just want to plug it right back. But I love y'all. I love y'all. And that's what's going to change the world is love. Nah, more. That's peace, bro. That's peace. Let me get in. I need to tune in. I'm gonna get off here and I'm gonna tune in. Say that. Islam, give some love to all, more. Likewise, bro. Islam, peace, love, etc. Peace. Alright. One. So peace, born. Peace. Y'all can still hear me?
Yeah, you're good, Mark.
Hold up, my fault. Can you still hear me, bro?
Yeah, we got you, Mark. You're good.
Okay, bet. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I don't know, man. The brother was calling me, and I felt like, you know, I had to just merge them. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Ironically, that's also the founder of Pardon the Interjection. So he gets a pardon for that one.
Yeah, no doubt. I wanted to say that too. Thank you, brother. I apologize. I couldn't say this before he hung up. But yeah, for opening up his platform, you know what I mean? And doing partner interjection and having us on. And I know it will be like so many times better these days to run it back and do another one. But yeah, man, shout out to the brother Supreme L and his consort, his wife, his lady, his, you know, sister, counterpart, however we view that. You know what I mean? Shout out to them. Yeah, man, but that was dope. So yeah, I'm just glad to see Moors keeping the arts and sciences alive from a genuine place. Not like a lot of these Moors who are like trying to act like they're repping for Moors, but have allegiance to, you know, something different. And that's going to be another show. Another broadcast. We'll talk. We get to touch on that. But yeah, man. So I just want to play this because I see a couple more people in the chat. So I just want to play this clip back one more time.
Yep.
Right, 3 to the song. For those who didn't hear what we were saying and where our premise of this conversation was coming from on El Haj Malik El Shabazz Born Day. You know, this is the premise. And it's definitely in correlation with what Noble Dryly was saying and the fact that we didn't just make this up. This is the legacy. Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations. And then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes will result because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our past in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people
in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
Islam.
And those were powerful, deep words, and something to really dissect where he was coming from, what he was saying, what he was trying to do, what he had been enlightened on with the lamp that was illuminating things. People went after the shadows, but as you were saying, the light, you see where he was coming from, where he was going.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he's going, ultimately. Because that's where this conversation really begins and ends. We can talk about everything we've been through, the struggle, all of that, but the reality is we have a beginning or Genesis, and we have a present. I don't even want to say an ending date because we're still here. We're not an extinct people, species, or whatever. We have an origin and we have a present, right? We have a then and we have a now. And to just really see it for what it is now and what happened from back then to now, it's really dope. But I already know by these angel numbers right here, the continuous ones. This has to be. It has to be Brother Balance. So with that, call me 111. I know we work with Balance. Yeah, greetings. You know it's me on the check-in. Salute.
Peace, war. Islam.
Top more in the house. I see you still doing your thing, man.
You know.
Yeah. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't hear the noise in the word of Drew Ali. You know what I'm saying? We got to do a video for that one, man. Put that on the biggest channel out here. You know?
Straight.
That's fire to this day. That's a classic. Still got, I was just listening to it on the whip.
Good
all
thing.
The Inquisition was had it blasting. All the Inquisition was lined up. They heard it loud while I was at the light. They was nervous. They was like, I don't want to deal with that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the rest of us was out here just looking. The sleepyhead more, they was just looking. Like, what's going on? I don't even hear nobody flying around with that type of noise going on. That's because they feel good and proud. I could fly around and play that type of rap.
That's what's up.
That's going to give some type of awakening to whoever catches it. You know?
Yep.
So I gotta salute you, Cujo.
Give thanks, more. Appreciate it.
You on your team. You already know. Keep up the good work.
I shall.
Israel, you doing your thing too, brother. Stay on your square at all times, like you always been doing, man. We gonna all get this right. We gonna get this right. You know?
Definitely.
Like you said, there's no very beginning and there's never no ending.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So we all going and learning as we go, you know, and evolving. As higher beings. So, like they say, each one teach one, each one reach one, you know? We don't have all the answers. That's why we all got to come back collectively and school one another, you know?
Islam.
But it's good to see us still on the radio, you know, doing what y'all do. I got to salute all Moors worldwide, you know, for tuning in. And I hope to see all of y'all sooner or later collectively. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I know what you're saying, Moore. Huh? I said, I know what you're saying, Moore. We all gotta see each other again. You already know, man. We far, near, and wide. We all around. We all over this globe, you know? We just gotta come back fully and collectively as one force, you know? Because it seems like the ones that's coming into this awakening, it's like it's throwing them off, and they, you know, they get misguided, a lot of them, you know, from the dirty morphs. And want to sell them all these packages, you know. So you got to keep telling them, don't go that direction, man. Stay away from them. Facts. I do want to say everything is true. People advertise themselves. No, I was saying people advertise themselves as if they're the sake of the sake. No doubt. I was there too. I got caught up in that. You know, I know all of us been down that road and got caught up with that. Yeah, so you see that we bobbed and weaved out of that. We bobbed and weaved. We're like, yo, something ain't right. Weaving out of there, out of here. Yeah. Keep that head in that book, you know what I'm saying? Keep that study up. Yeah, I would still say though that no matter what they feel or whatever, even when people are deemed as leaders and they tell you that they're not, they're just your brother, man, or sister coming to show the way, you know, to give you some information, you know what I mean? It's still like people give these labels and then try to duck their own responsibility of studying to become competent. You know, that we all had to become competent ourselves. You know, so if they're begging everybody to do something for them, you know, and sucking and draining people's time, you know, and don't want to compensate for it, I agree. Post reference points and studying them to become competent to do it themselves. I get it though. Like, we're all at different levels. But the point is to get to a level, whatever level that is, where you can, you know, hold, you know, you can speak for yourself. You can become competent. Not just to speak for yourself, but for everybody coming behind you. Right? No doubt. Like, that's true. Yeah. So, people can adopt this responsibility to becoming competent. No matter how competent you are, no matter how competent Cujo is, Harvey Day is, whoever else is, you know, there's a responsibility to actually become competent and weigh both sides of any facts presented and be able to stand on this.
That comes back to knowing thyself, yeah? And taking care of thyself, too.
To the fact that, we all have to accept the fact that we're going to have to look within to make the change that we want. No matter what, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you got to see it your own. You know what I mean? Got to make it your own. But there's definitely another caller I wanted to get to.
All right. I just wanted to shoot that wisdom out, And I send love to both of y'all and all the many more out there in the globe. Keep up the good work, man.
Islam, more honors to you.
Islam to you. And keep doing what you're doing.
Peace, more.
But I'm damn sure doing my part to the best of my ability.
Straight.
Salute. My brethren.
Peace.
All right. That being said, call us 682-360. Peace, man. You on the air. Live with us.
Peace, I'm here. Islam.
Islam, more.
Islam.
I want to get honest to Prophet Noble Drali and his forerunner Marcus Garvey. I want to give honors to Malik Shabazz. For carrying on and finding his truth. Right? And so that was a good snippet that y'all played from him. Because it did show his evolution on how he realized what was really important as far as on a national level. Right? Because a lot of our people back in those times took it to a civic, what they call a civil rights level. Right? And so just like Noble Drew Ali understood that it was a national level. That's why he brought us back to nationality, because it was a national problem. Right? But just like he said, I think Malcolm, where he was at that time, was we need to pull it out of the jurisdiction of the United States into international level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But see, Noble Drew Ali had already discovered it. And so, by returning our nationality, we'll pull that out of that 14th Amendment jurisdiction, which there was no need for, into a national level. Because in the essence of the Constitution, it was written for free men. When you look into the Constitution and how it was written, these same people that wrote that Constitution were running from what they call it slavery today, and what they call it servitude. Can't think of the word right now. Where they were running from Great Britain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then, as soon as they got free, they never want to go back to that mentality, that position that they was in. So they tried to create a society or government that would allow them never to go back to that position. And then turned around
same thing to us. But when it was written, the whole thing was written for free men, and so that men wouldn't end up in that position. They just understood that they needed us in order to build this nation. Without us, there would be no America. They needed us. They needed us to pick the cotton, us to build the houses, keep everything up and running, and use our energy, right? And then turn around and sold it to keep up the tobacco fields, keep up all of this, and then turned around and use the labor that we put in order to build this nation, build this country. But Noah Lee said, don't get rid of the last name. Why did he say don't get rid of the last name? Because he understood that most people, like Malcolm X said, will put an X on it. X out the last name. Noah Lee said don't get rid of it. Why? And when you go back to thought, you understand that we have an investment in this country. It's almost like us putting into stock, and then when the stock starts falling, instead of us pulling out our investment, we say we don't want it and walk away and leave our investment in the stock. We have investment in this country. Our ancestors built this country, sweat, blood, tears. No, I'm not getting rid of the last name because whoever put that last name on my ancestors owe me. They owe me. Right? Why you say don't get rid of the last name? So guess what? Instead of me throwing it away, I'm bringing myself back into the law. Right? Because I got an investment in it. My ancestors invested their blood, sweat, and tears. I'm not throwing that away. Not me. Right? Now, what Malcolm X realized is it's international property. But without a nationality, you can't do anything with the nation. It just don't work like that. So Noble Ali understood in order for us to gain any national recognition, you need a nationality with a national flag, right? That way, you can go to the United Nations and say, look, we are of the human family. We come from the nation of, right? Our ancestors, Morocco, right? And so, in the Constitution, it was written for protection of the national side. Just most people don't know how to understand and pull it out. It says the law of nations. I forgot what article. Article 1 for sure. I forgot what.
Add this on too. I'm sorry. I apologize. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Yeah. There was a caller from the 419 area code that dropped, and I apologize. I wanted to acknowledge you. But at this point in time, we got a super special caller, a superhero, a super hero, that we had at this very point in time. Allow on the line, hands up, and this is my woman on the planet, days. Like, the short one, a mama, like my
Islam.
Islam, peace and love. I am feeling what the caller just was saying, and I'm kind of vibing with him. But we got to remember something. When the prophet came on the scene, he went and had them take our national flag that already existed out of the vault. So therefore, when you read the prophet's words, he tells you, some will say that the 10,000 years that flag flew. Some will say 50,000. That's when you talk about the moon flag, right? The white flag. But so that means that we were already here. We were already a nation of people. The modern Europeans who you're talking about that was getting from the British, those were the British Moors that they were, quote unquote, as you say, running from, because the Moroccan Moors, if you will, on this side, had a treaty with their brethren, the British Moors. They brought the modern Europeans over here, and they were enslaved over here on the land that we were already here. We didn't have a constitution law of the land because we didn't need one. We followed divine law. When we needed one was after they declared, they came to us for assistance, which is recorded in the Continental Congress and also you can find it in the records of American history. When they came over, when they were here and they wanted assistance from us. See, we said we helped them build, you're right, we helped them build their thing by telling them that they need to ask for their independence from the British Moors. And once they did, of course, there was a resistance of 7-year fights all on the seas, all of that, like that, while they waited on the coastline as slaves, hoping to be free. And once they gained that, now we had to tell them, what the law of our land was. But first, we had to do the treaty so that they could now have their independence to be free on the sea. So that's an agreement. That's kind of a business agreement with them, because now they can be independent to do their own business. So we gotta always put ourselves first, because we were and we are, and the day came, and yes, brother, they did turn around after getting their freedom from all these tyrannical things and turned around and put it on us, including the name. Now, the name that what the prophet said to declare your nationality and and your position was the title. Now you will find the title still embedded in some of the land records. So what that means is we were already here. We must put ourselves first, because we were here first. Once that Constitution came, it was to tell them how to act as far as the law of their agreement to do business on the American or our Moroccan land. So we get in there, but we got to be clear to always keep ourselves first. And remember that he got that flag out, so it existed already. We assisted them, and they flipped the script and told the lie as if we're the ones who came over by the droves and buffalo. Yes. So we got to keep that in mind that we was already here.
Hey, listen, why you and we on this Sons of Allah, and I just want to say call a 419. I see you, and we're gonna let you on. But
yes,
you being my biological mother, I know this may sound controversial,
yes.
but say I thank you for shining your light in the dismal crypts of niggerdom. You know what I'm talking about? Like bringing us. You hear me? Like, I don't mean that. you know, I know we the same, but what I'm saying is the information that you are a conduit for us to acknowledge or view or disagree with or agree with. I just want to thank you for helping us all, whether we realize it or not, whether people want to give you props for it or not. Over the past decade and some change, I just want to thank you for helping us come from being niggas to understanding we're in the image and likeness of God. And I know there's a lot of people who wouldn't agree with that analysis, but the reality is that is the truth. Whether people say,
well, please let me say that everything I just said you can find as documented proof. If you recall that there was a Continental Congress before the United States of America Congress. So that tells you right there, just a little bit of thinking, and you can affirm that, that what is being said is being said. You know, that we were here first. They had to march to Philadelphia in 1774. That's called the Articles of Association, and the prophet led you to the Articles of Association so that you could find that, because that's considered a constitution, because the Constitution is any agreement. So when he says the Constitution in 1774, if you read his work again, you'll see that in 1774 and in 1775, the United States of America did not exist yet. So he was not, in fact, by documentation and thinking, talking about the Constitution that we know of today, because it didn't exist. So that's why he took you back that far. And then they got sold. So now you're talking about the USA. But all of it is documented. That Article of Association is powerful. If you read it, like the brother was saying, if you read that tells you all of the things they suffered, that they suffered. And he's right. They turned around. And because, look, remember the spirit and psychology in a man's mind. When you think of the fact that they were born into this slavery, that's all they knew. So they turned around and did the same thing. So our way out is to have this information as truth that can be, there's no argument, it's documented. But in order to get the documents, you got to do what the prophet said, which is study. So I'll say, you know, like we do that another time, but I'll say just going back to 1774 that the prophet sent you to, automatically by thinking lets you know that this was happening before they came, because they didn't get established. They didn't even write the Declaration of Independence until 1776. So that tells you everything sort of leads you in the right direction just with that. So we were singing in the process. Islam. Yeah. Islam.
I'll listen to you, Mother Ron. And I feel like you made a good point. And what you're saying is lined up with the prophet, just like in chapter 47, when he says that their inhabitation and dominion, right? Our inhabitation and dominion extended across the Great Atlantic, into, you know, Mexico and all of that, right? So you're on point with that.
So the stripping of the title, or as we call the last name. When we talk about last name without title, because that title is the title to your estate, and not your estate in a commercial way, but to the land in terms of being hills and bays. And remember, Resolution 75, all that did was reaffirm those facts. Because they didn't give us the title hills and bays. So we had to go in and say, whoa, what's up? And they're like, oh yeah, that's right. Y'all are hills and bays. You see? Oh yeah, the farmer had to go get the flag. Say, oh, that's right. Y'all have a national flag already.
problem. No problem.
To acknowledge caller 419 at this moment. Stay on the line. Caller 419-558. Peace, fam. I just want to say thankful for you, calling in and calling back in. I hope you're still there. Peace, fam. 419-558. Live on the air. Are you with us?
I am with you with one eye open. I am with you. It's long.
We didn't even plan this. This is like the energy tonight on the.
I know. It's everything is so divine because I waited and like Mia said, I did drop out and then I called back, so I was just really on point. We're it's a storm here, so everything is like shut down, but whatever. And everything is so divine because the reason I was calling the reason I pressed 1 originally was because at the very beginning, Mia's asked the question, and the question was, why does it seem like we're getting beat up just because we want to claim our nationality? Everyone else and all the other nations do not get the abuse that we get when we're trying to claim our nationality. And I wanted to say that the reason we are getting the worst hit just for being who we are is because everything that they just said. They did all of this stuff, and then they abused the position that they got in, and they're so scared that if we do all wake up and get in the position to where we used to be, that we're going to kick them out, and they don't have anywhere else to go. I'm not saying that we are, we ain't, but I'm saying that I believe that that's the reason why it's so hard, and we get anybody else, it doesn't matter. Somebody want to call themselves Chinese, whatever, it's all right. But as soon as a more confess to be who they say they are, it's like, no way, you're Negro, black, or colored, no way. And that is designed because if we wake up, it's over.
Yeah.
The fight will be over. Yes, exactly. So I think that's why we are getting the abuse that we are getting when we're trying to wake up. I also wanted to say just super big shout outs to that clip. I have never heard it before. At the beginning, at 9 o'clock, my son was still up. He's asleep now, but I had him listen to it. Super shout out to you, Miz, for repeating and kept playing that over, I think, like 3 or 4 times. Mm-hmm. Every time I heard it, I was receiving some new information. So that was, like, amazing. I would like to definitely get that. If you can send that to me in some type of way, I really, really want it. It's a super great class. Cujo probably fell asleep, but if he's in,
I'm here.
Shout out to Cujo. Shout out to Miz for this beautiful, wonderful, wonderful class. Definitely felt that Taurus energy. And thank you for taking my call.
It's love.
All right, sister. And I just want to reiterate again, we did not plan this. I'm listening, he's listening. It's just divine that the sister's energy came on like it did. And that's just the way it was divinely meant to be. But, and thank you for taking my call, too.
It's love. Like we say. Yeah, like we say, you can't have sons of Allah without mother.
Right. Yeah.
I appreciate all the mothers, and it's just so beautiful. I did want to play it. I did play it 3 times, but I think
One more time, we'll put it on the 4th and on the square.
Miss, can I remind you of something as well? With all these charges on the line, May 19th being El Hadley's so was your aunt. Did you forget? Your aunt's born on this day.
But
and tourist season. Yes.
Yeah, what y'all say about 2 days, Gemini? Right now, in this moment, this is tourist season. We're giving props to our spiritual, political, national brethren, El Hajj, Malik, El Shabazz. But yes, as well, I was born on this day. I definitely sent her a B-Day shout out. And she's tourist season too. But I don't know. I mean, it's a story for you to tell. She's the only tourist of y'all, sisterhood, brotherhood, born at this time of year. Like most of us are. This tribe and so I just want to say, shout out to this particular day and time. And I want to play the distinguishment. We've played this before, but El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, what people call Malcolm X, has definitely also in his maturation, connected himself in the concept of being a Muslim to being the same as a Muslim, right? Like he said it himself. And there is the concept, not even the concept, but the factual evidence of Muhammad Ali, talking about the fact that he's not a black Muslim, he's just a Muslim, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in correlation to what El Hajj Malik El Shabazz was saying, wherever we come to a middle ground at, we have to respect this work of nationality and the fact that there's something about the UDA not having jurisdiction that is paramount to us as a people to understand and comprehend today. So I've played this clip of El Hajj Shabazz, mentioning the fact that we're not black Muslims, we're Muslims. And then he says, as Muslims, they are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims. What? Just outside of the Moorish Science Temple of America, Noble Drew Ali, and any scholars prior to 1914, what people called themselves Muslims, Moslen, as El Hajj Malik El Shabazz was saying, Muslims are the same as. Just let me know. Because, it's in history books from Noble Drew Ali's time and backwards through the ages where we could really trace ourselves. But I'm going to play this clip, and I want y'all to really think about why would he say, as Muslims, we are the same as those who call themselves Muslims? If he was NOI all of this, who were those people who was claiming to be Muslims, Moslen? And why would he feel as though he had to say as Muslims, Muslim, that they are the same as those who call themselves Muslims? So I'm going to play that, and it's something to really, really think about. Why was he saying this in his maturation days? Right? Why was he saying as Muslims, they are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims? Moslen. Let's just
we would like to let you know who is this group that always referred to as Black Muslims. Actually, the followers of the honorable Elijah Muhammad, you don't call ourselves black Muslim after. Listen, but all the black Muslims taking you out of the life. I said not black Muslims. I think about it. We don't call ourselves black Muslim after. We don't call ourselves black Muslim after. This is a name that was invented by a so-called Negro preacher named Reverend C.L. Clinton. This is a name that was invented by a so-called Negro preacher named Reverend C.L. Clinton, who was a preacher, a Methodist preacher down in Atlanta, Georgia, being selected and sent to Boston University, where he did some research on the Muslim, the work of the honorable Elijah Muhammad here in America. After Reverend Lincoln came to study, he wrote a thesis, and after his acceptance, he was called a doctor. I think he's a doctor of Muslimology, and he developed his thesis into a book called The Black Muslim, and today the white man calls us the Black Muslims, not because we are black people who are Muslims, but he started to make it look like we are black Muslims, something distinct, separate and apart from the Muslims in Africa and Asia. Because the number one tactic that the white man has always used when he wanted to suppress and oppress and exploit has been divide and conquer. So he tries to divide us from the Muslims abroad. He tries to divide us from our own people here in this country. His constant tactic or effort to create division and divide us has been a failure, thanks to Almighty God Allah. His constant tactic or effort to create division and divide us has been a failure, thanks to Almighty God Allah. As Muslims, we are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims. As Muslims, we are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims. As Muslims, we are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims. As Muslims, we are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims. As Muslims, we are the same as the people who call themselves Muslims. We are Muslims because our religion is the religion of Islam. And there are 725 million people in the Gulf world, primarily in Africa and Asia, whose religion is the religion of Islam. 725 million people in the Gulf world who 5 times a day turn towards Mecca and bear witness that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. In the name of our forefathers, and the honor of the Elijah Muhammad has brought us, they say, Ashhadu la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Before you and I will go, La ilaha illallah. Muhammadan Rasulullah. Yes. That means there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his apostle. And you will usually find the white man will call on or bear witness to any God but Allah. And he knows people who serve God or accept those who use the name Allah as the supreme being. And in saying this, we believe that there is one God who is the supreme being, the creator of the universe, and that we call him Jehovah, and we call him Christ. We who are Muslims call him Allah. We don't never know Jesus as being God. With the very intention of God to America and bring I think about it.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations. And then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes equal a result because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our past in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
Oh yeah, and on the go. R.I.P. DJ K. Slay for presenting one of the dopest MCs ever on the planet.
Yeah, dedication to all my homies locked down. Don't give up hope. Keep your mind focused. Trigger happy fast. Take these bars and put them in your conversation. The Lord is proceedings. You broke the law allegedly, and you caught a case. You sitting in the cell with your hands on your face. The district attorney, they gotta get an indictment, so they take the case to the grand jury. You not invited. Now you can let the DA go and choose your fate, or you can go to the grand jury and plead your case. No less than 16 people, no more than 23. And penal by the Superior Court. Understand me, gotta look them in the eyes. As simple as can be, make them believe you innocent. You could be free, but you know it's always the flip side to every coin. The judge, the legal way, DA, they all join. And if you get indicted, keep a memory foul. Cause you gotta tell the same story when you go to trial. Adolescent, adult, juvenile. I hope you jotting it down. If you locked up for more than 120 hours, man, just wait. Cause without the disposition of a felony complaint or commitment of a hearing, they gotta open the gate and give you an R&R. That's your 188 day. This is just a brief another knowledge I possess. In the belly of the beast, they put you to the test. My law library, what chapter is next? Section 12010. Warrant of arrest, law library, law library, law library.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.